What's your price? The question was supposed to end in cash, in territory, in blood, but not in her. She'd served these men 100 times, kept her head down, stayed invisible in the shadows of their violence. Until tonight, when Kang Minho's rival pushed too far and the king's response wasn't a number, it was a direction, his hand pointing straight at her like she was the only currency that mattered. The room froze, and she realized with creeping horror that she'd just been claimed by a man who never let go of what he wanted. Welcome to K-Afro Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Isabella Kingsley had perfected the art of being no one. In the private rooms of the Lotus, Seoul's most exclusive underground club, she moved like smoke, pouring $1,000 whiskey for men who bought and sold lives before breakfast. 6 months serving Korea's criminal elite had taught her one survival rule: never meet their eyes, never speak unless spoken to, never exist beyond the moment they needed something. Tonight, she wore the same black cocktail dress, the same neutral expression, the same careful invisibility that had kept her breathing in a world where pretty girls disappeared for far less than curiosity. The private room reeked of expensive cologne and barely concealed violence. Kang Minho sat at the head of the table, a study in tailored menace, his presence filling the space like cold water rising. Even sitting still, he looked dangerous, the kind of beautiful that belonged on warning labels. Sharp jaw, sharper eyes, the controlled stillness of something lethal choosing not to strike. At 32, he controlled half of Seoul's underworld and all of its fear. Isabella had served him dozens of times, and he'd never once looked at her. She preferred it that way. Across from him sat Choi Sung-ho, a rival boss from Busan with ambition bigger than his common sense, and a smile that made Isabella's skin crawl. The negotiation had been tense for an hour, territorial lines being redrawn, percentages argued over shipments Isabella didn't want to know about. She refreshed drinks, cleared ashtrays, became furniture with a pulse. Then Choi leaned back, that oil-slick smile widening. You want my southern ports. I want something equivalent in value. His eyes drifted across the room and locked onto Isabella with the casual assessment of a man pricing livestock. What's your price, Minho? For real cooperation? What would you actually give up? The room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. Minho's lieutenants went still, hands drifting toward concealed weapons. Isabella's heart kicked against her ribs, but she kept her expression blank, her hands steady on the whiskey bottle. Disappear, she told herself. Be nothing. Be air. Minho tilted his head, studying Choi with the detached interest of an entomologist examining an insect before pulling its wings off. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet certainty of a man who'd never been told no in his life. My price? He lifted one hand, index finger extending, pointing directly at Isabella. Her. The word hit Isabella like a physical blow. The bottle nearly slipped from her grip. Every man in the room turned to stare at her, and she felt her carefully constructed invisibility shatter like dropped glass. Choi's expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and something uglier. Minho's face remained unreadable, carved from ice and absolute authority, but his eyes burned with something Isabella couldn't name and didn't want to recognize. The server girl? Choi laughed, the sound grating. You're joking. I never joke about what belongs to me. Minho's tone could have frozen blood. He hadn't looked away from Isabella, hadn't blinked, and she felt pinned beneath that stare like a butterfly on a board. You asked my price. That's it. Her. For your cooperation. Though I should clarify, the answer is no. She's not for sale, not for trade, not for anything you could possibly offer. She's mine. She was mine the moment she walked into this room 6 months ago. She just didn't know it yet. Isabella's thoughts fragmented into white noise. 6 months. He'd noticed her 6 months ago. Every careful moment of invisibility had been a delusion. He'd been watching. Choi's face darkened. You can't be serious. Over some foreign waitress? I'm offering you the entire southern shipping route. And I'm telling you that every port in Korea isn't worth what she is. Minho finally looked away from Isabella, his attention returning to Choi with laser focus. We're done here. Take your offer elsewhere. Get out of my city by morning. The dismissal was absolute. Choi's men shifted, uncertain, reading the room's razor-edge tension. Violence hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Choi stood slowly, his expression promising retribution. You'll regret this, Minho, choosing some nobody over business, over respect. The only thing I regret is wasting an hour on a man too stupid to recognize what has value. Minho's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the room. You have 30 seconds to leave before I stop being polite. Choi left, his men scrambling after him, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the paintings. The room exhaled. Minho's lieutenants relaxed incrementally, exchanging glances that said they'd just witnessed something unprecedented. Their boss didn't lose his temper. He didn't make impulsive decisions. He certainly didn't choose a woman over a multi-million-dollar shipping deal. Isabella stood frozen, the whiskey bottle clutched in both hands now, her mind screaming at her to run, to apologize, to do something other than stand there like prey, hypnotized by a predator's stare. Because Minho was looking at her again, and this time there was no boardroom mask, no careful neutrality. This time she saw everything. Possession, obsession. A hunger so intense it should have been frightening, except some treacherous part of her responded to it, recognized it, wanted to move closer instead of away. Everyone out. Minho didn't raise his voice, but his men moved instantly, filing out in silence until Isabella was alone with him in the suddenly cavernous room. The door clicked shut. The silence pressed against her eardrums. Minho stood, moving with the controlled grace of something predatory, crossing the space between them in 3 strides. He stopped close enough that Isabella could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body, count the shades of brown in his eyes if she'd been capable of coherent thought. Up close, he was devastating, the kind of beautiful that made smart girls stupid, and Isabella had spent 6 months training herself not to notice, not to react, not to feel the pull of gravity that seemed to exist around him. Do you know what you are? His voice was low, intimate, the kind of tone meant for dark rooms and darker confessions. You're the only thing in this city I can't buy, can't take, can't control. 6 months I've watched you. 6 months of you serving me drinks and treating me like I'm invisible. Do you have any idea what that does to a man like me? To want something and not be able to have it simply by deciding it should be mine? Isabella's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm nobody. You're everything. He lifted one hand, fingertips brushing her jaw so gently she barely felt it, but her skin ignited at the contact, her breath catching audibly. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing I want before sleep. You're the reason I come to this club instead of sending lieutenants. You're the only person in my world who looks at me like I'm just a man instead of a monster, and you don't even know you're doing it. And tonight, Choi looked at you like you were a thing he could possess, like you were currency, and I wanted to kill him with my bare hands. I still might. The confession should have terrified her. Instead, something in Isabella's chest cracked open, 6 months of careful detachment spilling out all at once. She'd told herself she didn't notice him. She'd lied. Every time he entered a room, her awareness shifted. Her pulse kicked up. Her skin felt too tight. She'd convinced herself it was fear. Standing this close to him, seeing the raw need in his eyes, she understood it had never been fear at all. You don't know me. Even to her own ears it sounded weak. You don't know anything about me. I know you take the last train home alone every night, and I have men follow at a distance to make sure you're safe. I know you're putting yourself through university, studying international business, maintaining a perfect average despite working here 6 nights a week. I know you send money home to your mother in London every month without fail. I know you drink tea instead of coffee, read on your breaks, and you have a scar on your left shoulder from a childhood accident you never talk about. His thumb traced her lower lip, and Isabella's knees went liquid. I know that when you laugh, really laugh, your whole face changes, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I know I would burn this city down before I let anyone hurt you. And I know that 6 months of trying to ignore this, trying to be rational, trying to let you have your normal life, has been the hardest thing I've ever done. But tonight, when Choi looked at you, I was done trying. I'm done pretending I can let you go. I'm done acting like you're not mine. I'm not yours. The words came out breathless, unconvincing. You can't just decide that. Then tell me you don't feel it. He leaned closer, his mouth inches from hers, his hand sliding into her hair. Tell me you don't think about me. Tell me your pulse doesn't race when I walk into a room. Tell me you don't wonder what it would be like if I touched you, if I kissed you, if I made you mine in every way that matters. Tell me, Isabella. Lie to me if you can. She couldn't. God help her, she couldn't form the words because they would be lies and they both knew it. She'd spent 6 months building walls against this exact moment, and he'd demolished them in minutes, stripped away every defense until she stood raw and exposed, and wanting things she'd convinced herself were impossible. Why me? The question came out small, vulnerable, nothing like the strength she'd tried to project. You could have anyone, models, actresses, women from your world who understand the rules. I don't want anyone from my world. His forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm against her lips. I want the girl who sees through the violence and the money and the power and still treats me like I'm human. I want the woman strong enough to stand in a room full of monsters and not flinch. I want you exactly as you are, and I will spend the rest of my life proving you didn't make a mistake choosing me back. I haven't chosen. The protest died as he kissed her, gentle at first, questioning, giving her space to pull away. She didn't pull away. Instead, she melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, 6 months of suppressed attraction detonating in her bloodstream like a bomb. He groaned against her mouth, the sound raw and desperate, and the kiss deepened, turned hungry, became the kind of connection that rewrote neural pathways and destroyed rational thought. When they finally broke apart, Isabella was trembling, her lips swollen, her carefully constructed world view in ruins around her feet. Minho looked undone in a way she suspected few people ever saw, his control fractured, his desire written plainly across features that were usually unreadable. He cupped her face in both hands like she was something precious and breakable. Come home with me. It wasn't a command despite his reputation, it was a plea, vulnerable and honest. Not because I'm telling you to, not because you're afraid, because you want this as much as I do. Because you trust me not to hurt you even though I'm the most dangerous thing you'll ever touch. Isabella should have said no. Should have walked away from the Mafia boss offering her a future that would be anything but safe. Should have chosen the careful, planned life she'd been building one paycheck at a time. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "Yes." His smile transformed him, made him look almost boyish despite the edge of possession that never quite left his eyes. He took her hand, threading their fingers together, and led her from the room. His men waited outside, their expressions carefully neutral, but Isabella caught the shock in their eyes. Their untouchable boss holding hands with a cocktail waitress like she was something infinitely valuable, like she was his. The drive to his penthouse passed in a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. Minho kept his hand on her thigh the entire time, grounding her, his thumb tracing absent patterns that set her nerves alight. He made quiet phone calls in rapid Korean, his tone all business, but his eyes never left her face for long. Whatever he was arranging, it involved her safety. She understood that much. His apartment overlooked the Han River, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Seoul like a glittering jewel. The space was elegant, minimalist, expensive in the way that whispered rather than shouted. But Isabella barely registered the surroundings because Minho was kissing her again, backing her against the closed door, his hands mapping her curves with reverent desperation. "Tell me to stop." His mouth traced her jaw, her throat, finding the pulse point that made her gasp. "Tell me this is too fast and I'll stop. I'll wait. I'll give you anything." "Don't stop." Her hands found the buttons of his shirt, needing to feel skin, needing to confirm he was real and this was happening. "Please don't stop." What followed was a blur of desperate touches and shed clothing, of whispered names and broken breathing. He carried her to his bedroom, laid her down on silk sheets like she was something sacred, and proceeded to worship every inch of her with a focused intensity that left her shaking. His control shattered in the best way, revealing the man beneath the monster's reputation, tender and fierce, and completely devoted to her pleasure before his own. Later, tangled together in the aftermath, Isabella felt the magnitude of what she'd done crash over her in waves. She'd just slept with Kang Minho, Seoul's most feared crime boss, a man whose name made grown men flinch. And he was, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder like she was made of something breakable and precious. His expression softer than she'd thought possible. "Stay." He said it like a prayer. "Not just tonight. Stay with me. Let me protect you. Let me give you everything." Reality intruded with cold clarity. "Your world nearly got me traded like property tonight. What happens when the next rival decides I'm leverage? When someone uses me to get to you?" "Then I kill them." Simple, absolute, terrifying in its sincerity. "Anyone who threatens you dies, not eventually, not legally, they simply stop existing. You think I made that choice lightly, choosing you over Choi's cooperation? I started a war tonight, Isabella. He'll come after me, after my business, and I don't care. I'd start 1,000 wars before I let anyone touch you." "That's insane." But her voice lacked conviction because some primitive part of her responded to his ruthless devotion, recognized it, as the most honest thing anyone had ever offered her. "Then I'm insane." He pulled her closer, his arms iron bands around her waist. "I've been insane for 6 months, trying to stay away from you, trying to be rational. I'm done being rational. You're mine now. You were mine the moment I saw you. And I will burn down anyone who tries to take you from me." She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt safe for the first time since arriving in Seoul. Despite the danger, despite the impossibility of their situation. Or maybe because of it. Because when Kang Minho looked at her, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was everything. The next morning, reality arrived in the form of Minho's head lieutenant Min Jun, with news that Choi had indeed declared war. Shipments intercepted, businesses burned, 3 of Minho's men in the hospital. Isabella listened from Minho's bed, wrapped in his shirt, watching him transform from tender lover to calculating warlord in seconds. "Pull everyone back to defensive positions." His voice was cold, clinical. "Increase security at all properties. And Isabella doesn't leave this building without a full detail. I don't care if she's going to the corner store. 4 guards minimum." "I'm not a prisoner." She spoke before thinking, then flinched at Min Jun's sharp intake of breath. Apparently, people didn't talk back to the boss. Minho's expression softened fractionally. You're not a prisoner. You're the woman I love, and I won't lose you because I was careless. Please, Isabella. Let me keep you safe. Let me do this one thing without fighting me. The I love you slipped in so casually it took her breath away. He said it like it was fact, like he'd been saying it for months in his head and only now gave it voice. And maybe he had been. Maybe that's what 6 months of watching her meant. 6 months of falling in love alone. Okay. The word felt like surrender and victory, simultaneously. But I have conditions. I'm not quitting school. I'm not becoming some kept woman with no purpose. And you tell me the truth about your world. All of it. No protecting me from reality. His smile held approval and relief. Deal. Though I'm replacing your apartment with something safer and you're getting a driver. Non-negotiable. They spent 3 weeks in a strange sort of honeymoon period punctuated by explosions of violence outside their bubble. Minho went to war, and Isabella learned what it meant to love a monster. Watched him order terrible things with cold efficiency, then come home to her, with blood on his hands and vulnerability in his eyes. He was ruthless and gentle, terrifying and tender, and she understood that for her, he would be both. The climax came fast and brutal. Choi kidnapped one of Minho's cousins as bait, demanded Isabella in exchange. Minho's response was immediate, absolute refusal and overwhelming violence. He mobilized his entire organization, called in every favor, and went after Choi with the kind of focused rage that made grown men religious. Isabella wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to stay safe in the penthouse with her guards. But she'd spent 6 months being invisible, and she knew how to slip away when needed. She followed at a distance, arrived at the warehouse where Choi had holed up just as the shooting started. Watched Minho move through his enemies like death incarnate, beautiful and terrible. Then she saw Choi circle behind him, gun raised, Minho's attention focused forward. Time crystallized. Isabella didn't think. She grabbed a fallen weapon, her hands steady despite never having held a gun before, and fired. The shot went wide but close enough to make Choi flinch, to make Minho spin and put 3 bullets in his rival before he could recover. The silence after violence was deafening. Minho crossed to her in long strides, disarmed her gently, pulled her against his chest hard enough to hurt. You could have died. You should have stayed safe. He stopped, his forehead pressing against hers. You saved my life. We're even then. Her voice shook, but her arms were steady around him. You saved mine first. 2 months later, Isabella stood in a private chapel wearing ivory silk, her mother crying in the front row, Minho's entire organization in attendance as witnesses. They'd tried traditional. It lasted a week before Minho proposed with a diamond that could fund a small country and a promise that he would spend his life being worthy of her courage. Now, as he slid the ring onto her finger, his eyes held everything she'd ever needed to see. Devotion, possession, love fierce enough to reshape his world around her. She was no longer invisible. She was the queen standing beside the king, the woman who'd walked into darkness and come out holding the monster's heart. You're mine. He said it like vows, like prayer, like absolute truth. And you're mine. She kissed him, soft and sure, claiming him back, forever. Outside, Seoul glittered in the darkness, violent and beautiful, a city of monsters and miracles. But inside this moment, there was only them. The crime boss who'd chosen love over empire, and the invisible girl who'd become his everything. Their story had started with a question about price, but the answer had nothing to do with money or power or territory. The answer was simple, absolute, and written in the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world worth keeping. Her. Always her. Forever her. And in the shadows of his world, that was enough. Thanks for watching, besties! If you loved Minho and Isabella's story, show some love with a like and subscribe for more epic romances. Comment your favorite moment below. We love hearing from you. See you in the next story.